A cinematic achievement, the MCU. For those of you who have been living under a rock for the last decade and a half, the MCU, also known as the Marvel Cinematic Universe, has been dominating the box office for the better part of 2 decades. It all started with the 2008 blockbuster Iron Man, starring Robert Downey Jr., and has now released 32 films over 15 years. The powerhouse finally hit its climax in the summer of 2019 with Avengers Endgame, which was 10 years in the process. What makes the MCU such a cinematic and cultural icon is because they did something that had never been done before, with many trying to replicate the success that the MCU managed to garner. They were able to give 3 superheroes their own individual films that would culminate in 2012's The Avengers, bringing all of the heroes from their own respective films together in this action-packed epic. None of this would have been possible without 5 contributing factors. Marvel making their own production studio, Kevin Feige, Joss Whedon, Jon Favreau, and of course, Robert Downey Jr. This franchise was a big deal in more than one way. It was the return of Robert Downey Jr., the first big hit for Marvel films since Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, and the first time a comic book company made their own production studio. Those first 10 years of the MCU were amazing, with only a few duds here and there. But none of them were so bad that they were unwatchable. Infinity War and Endgame were and will forever be some of the biggest superhero films ever. I'll never forget the first time I saw Jon Favreau's and RDJ's Iron Man. The first time I saw it, I was with my family, but it was so good, I went to go see it 2 more times, with the last 2 times both being with close friends of mine. Every time the MCU released a movie, it was a big deal. It was a Marvel frenzy. Unfortunately, now that the first 3 phases of the MCU, also known as the Infinity Saga, is over, it appears that the MCU is having a hard time regaining their former popularity. Don't get me wrong, every 2 movies or so they release are pretty good superhero movies. However, none of the Phase 4 films were anything to call home about, unfortunately. And with all of us fans hoping that they'll regain their footing before it's too late, they'd best hurry too. Especially now that DC has hired a new showrunner who's worked with Marvel named James Gunn. In fact, Gunn has directed 4 MCU films, if you include Guardians of the Galaxy's Christmas special. But even with all of their less popular films, they still show no sign of slowing down anytime soon. Especially with talks of bringing the Fantastic Four and X-Men into the MCU, plus the release of Deadpool 3 just around the corner. For those of us fortunate enough to witness the groundbreaking event that is the Marvel Cinematic Universe should consider ourselves lucky. What they were able to achieve successfully only happens maybe once in a lifetime. Thanks to the MCU, superhero and comic book based films are no longer laughed at by studios. Instead, they are sought after. Everybody is looking for the next big cinematic universe. And with as great of a run that the MCU has had, unfortunately, it can't last forever. At least, not to this scale. Marvel has managed to change the way that the film industry looks at franchises and filmmaking as a whole. I think it would be a fair assumption to say that the MCU is the biggest, most well-known film franchise in history. In film history. Thanks to the MCU, we are living in an era that comic book fans had only ever dreamt of. They made a superhero culture. Superheroes are now the biggest box office draws around the world, and that is in large part to the MCU. Every studio is making their own superhero movies, cartoons, shows, and more. I'm so happy that I got to be alive and witness the rise of the superhero genre. For those of you who are too young to remember superhero movies before the MCU, boy do I have something to tell you. Superhero flicks were far from great movies. The vast majority of them were like the early 2000s Fantastic Four and George Clooney's Batman. Granted, there were a few gems in the mud, like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, the Dark Knight trilogy, and even the Blade trilogy, but those were few and far between. Even then, those movies weren't perfect, except for two of them, which would be the Dark Knight and Spider-Man 2. Personal opinion. The MCU has changed the filmmaking industry, the comic book industry, and the world of superheroes. And one day, when I have children of my own, I plan on showing them the MCU films. All 250 of them. No, but seriously, I think a lot of people don't take into consideration just how important the MCU has been to filmmaking. And time will only tell how damaging it's been to the industry as well. Damages that we're already beginning to see. Thank you all for watching. If there's another subject you'd like me to make a video essay about, leave a comment below letting me know. In the meantime, I'll be working on my second video essay regarding the positives and negatives of video games. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.